Says huge news. After years of escaping accountability, Democracy Watch is filing for prosecution of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over the SNC-Lavalin affair. The penalties are significant fines and possible jail terms, both for breach of trust and obstruction of justice. So we'll listen to a little bit of this, not the whole thing, but it's interesting. Here we go.
I'm here today.
It's fast. Sorry.
To announce that Democracy Watch is taking the next step in its years-long process to hold the Trudeau government and Prime Minister Trudeau and the Trudeau cabinet accountable for pressuring the Attorney General back in the fall of 2018 to intervene and stop the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. Given the evidence and given as well that the RCMP did not apply the correct legal standard in terms of reviewing the evidence and determining whether there had been an obstruction of justice, and also given that the RCMP did not consider in its investigation whether the Prime Minister or anyone else had committed a breach of trust, Democracy Watch is today filing an application in Ontario Court of Justice for court approval to pursue a private prosecution of these allegations of obstruction of justice and breach of trust. The RCMP did a weak, incomplete investigation. They only interviewed 4 of 15 key witnesses, and they trusted the public statements of everyone involved in pressuring the Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould. The penalties are significant fines and possible jail terms, both for breach of trust and obstruction of justice.
So, I mean, fingers crossed. I'm not wholly convinced, but the last part here, he's making the point that they're trying it in Ontario courts, so they're hoping to be out from under the boot heel of Trudeau-influenced justice. And I think that's interesting, right? Like, interesting stuff going on there. Here is fraud on a massive level in the insurance industry, in medical industry. And how it works leads me to believe that this kind of fraud is rampant in Canada. Here is Wall Street apes laying it out. Elon Musk and the DOGE team looking at Medicare. Pharmacist says, this medication is perfenadone. Medicare filled it 85,000 times in 2022 at an average cost of $8,000 per prescription. Normal cost without insurance is only $200 to fill for that medication. They spent $680 million on that one drug in just 1 year. However, at my pharmacy, which is a cost plus pharmacy, meaning we don't take insurance, that same prescription would only cost $200. If we filled all 85,000 prescriptions, it would cost $17 million total. That means Medicare is overpaying by $663 million every year, right? Like, I was at a doctor. Have you ever been to a doctor's office and they say, when they're going to write your prescription, do you have insurance? Do you have a work insurance? Do you have any kind of, like, do you have to pay, or do you have somebody who pays for you? And that will dictate the script written by the doctor, because if you pay, then they'll give you cheap medication that costs maybe off-brand, or maybe it's a different, like, there's the main medication that came out, and then years later, when that main medication's copyright basically runs out, then other places can copy their formula and put out a medication that's very similar. So the doctor will give you the cheap one rather than the main one. But if you have insurance, then the doctor will give you the main one, right? And so what kind of cost is that? How much is that? And I know I've experienced that. I said, what's the difference? And he said, well, one is this much and one is this much. And I said, oh, well, give me the cheaper one. He said, well, if your insurance is going to cover it, then it doesn't matter. And I was like, oh, sure, whatever. I was like, I guess I have insurance, so yeah, whatever. So I got the expensive one, right? But how much is that? Right? So that's going to inflate insurance costs, right? And that's bad, right? And isn't it a grift? If the cost of this is $200 and you could get it for $17 million, is $663 million overpayment like worthwhile? And if that $663 million overpayment isn't worthwhile, is $663 million a worthwhile amount to like then be plowed right back into frontline care rather than medications, rather than bureaucracy? I don't know. It just seems like there's better things to do with this than pay the insurance industry, right? $663 million. House of Commons staffer says, remember this tweet? Justin Trudeau says to those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canadians will welcome you. Sit down and buckle up. Or do you ever wonder how much migrants get when they arrive? Sit down and buckle up. You'll probably want to bookmark this tweet. Here we go. First off, here's the link to the federal support, just federal. There are provincial programs too. You can have a look for yourself. So this is just federal, okay? He says migrants are supported under the Resettlement Assistance Program. It's public as a courtesy, apparently. And so it's posted on the department's website as a courtesy to stakeholders. Interesting. First up, we have a one-time furniture allowance. It's up to $1,550 for a single person without dependents. If furniture is provided through an agreement with a supplier, they can only get $750 cash. A couple with 3 kids gets $3,885. Every extra kid is a cool $420 more. This is a direct stimulus to our economy. If you bring in 100,000 people every year or more that are getting all of this government money, that is a stimulus on our economy. And if you stop all those people coming in, that money doesn't get spent anymore. You see? And that stimulus ends, and what happens to our economy? It cools down to the point of very cool, right? If not depressive, right? And so that's one of the reasons why these programs exist. Now, why couldn't you give this money to people, to you and me? Because we would hoard it. We'd put it into our savings, or we'd put it on our debt, right? And people say to me, you don't know the average person. They would definitely not do that. And maybe that's true. Maybe they'd go out and spend it, but they wouldn't be buying cars probably. And it wouldn't be at the rate that people who are here with no car and no clothes and no house would be buying those things, those big things. And I'm comparing those two populations. If you're comparing a new Canadian, somebody who's just arrived on the government teat basically, versus like me, if I get a bunch of money, I'm probably not buying a car, right? I'm probably slamming it into savings or doing some other things, investments, things like that. But I'm not slamming it into like commercial goods. I'm not slamming it into, if I'm buying a house, it's a rental, it's an investment property, which they don't want. You know what I mean? They don't want to give it to us because we would not do with it what they need us to do with it to stimulate the economy. Okay, that's why it goes directly into the economy this way. And they're saying, oh, well, it helps Canadians. Yeah, well, I think Canadians maybe don't want the help, right? Here is, $750 cash. So they give them $750 cash if there's a service providing the furniture. Next, we have a linens allowance. A single person gets $80. A family of 6 gets $480. Additional kids get $80 more. Basic household needs allowances next. That's curtains and pots and pans and lamps, etc. Oddly, it says that the cost should not exceed or cannot exceed. Not sure if there's a penalty. Single person gets $600. Family of 6 gets $850. Each additional kid gets you $50 more. Next up is staple allowance, basic food, cleaning supplies, one-time payment of $210 for a single person and $90 for each additional person. There is no maximum number of people. Next is clothing allowance. This one's a bit complicated. It depends on the season when the person arrives. One-time payment of $375 per adult and $250 per dependent under 18. Winter clothing allowance is $175 more per adult and $125 more per kid if they arrive between April 16 and October 14. The rest of the year it is provided, but discretion can be made. If all seasonal clothes are not provided or there are health or emergency reason, then extra funds can be provided. Even that annoying fee for the utility installation is covered, $75. And don't worry about the monthly internet costs because monthly communication allowance will help pay for them, covered in a different thread. School startup allowance, that's $150 more per kid ages 4 to 17. Those 18 to 21 and over can even get it if it's determined to be in their interest to be in high school. This payment is provided twice if they arrive between September 1st and May 31st. Assistance loans, it doesn't say how much they can get, but they are available. They are targeted more towards legitimate immigrants, but available in some cases to refugees. Now on to the big ones, food and incidentals and shelter allowances. These should be the biggest monthly numbers, but they are not listed. Officials are supposed to consult provincial shelter allowances. Provincial allowances can be exceeded on a case-by-case basis, which I suspect they are because I believe the Ontario allowance is based on Ontario Works, which is $733 a month. Can't rent much for that in Ontario. A housing supplement is available as well. Just the supplement is $200 for a single family. Families of 6 or more get $300. So that's a lot of money. Further on this, singles or multiple and extended families sharing a unit are considered as individuals and get up to the maximum. So shaking up a bunch of singles or 2 families pays off. Yeah, that's pretty wild. Up next, transportation allowance. This one covers a monthly bus pass for anyone 18 plus with some exceptions. But if your bus pass costs less than $75, there's no public transport, then you get the $75 anyway. Communication allowance. Here's $30 towards your cell phone bill or internet, as per previous tweet. Age of majority top up. Here's $150 a month if your dependent turns 18, but the age of majority in your province is 19. This is meant to help when your 18-year-old kid is no longer eligible for the child benefit, which is astounding that they were eligible for anyway. They also get the monthly transportation allowance. Dietary allowance is $75 per family per month if you get a doctor's note for health conditions. Maternity food allowance, it's like the previous food allowance, $75 per month based on a doctor's note. They can be combined. So you can get $150 for health conditions for dietary concerns. Maternity clothing allowance, here's $200 for being pregnant. Baby coming soon, here's $750 to help with the clothing and furniture, and it's given 2 months prior to the due date of the child. Here's still not enough. Come talk to us. We have an exceptional allowance that may still help. Did a migrant or their dependent die in Canada or on the way to Canada? We cover that too. And finally, don't forget your Canada Child Benefit, your GST benefit, or your multitude of provincial benefits, including free or subsidized housing. Let us help you with that. Best of all, it's not considered eligible income. Finally, welcome to Canada. Remember that Justin Trudeau brought you here. Please sign up for the Liberal Party. This is really astounding stuff. Not the individual payments per se. $75 for a bus pass or $30 toward a cell phone don't even cover the cost. But what is astounding is that there are tens of thousands of people here illegally getting all this free taxpayer subsidized one-time and monthly payments while actual Canadians struggle to afford the same items. I think we need welfare reform. This is the next level generosity. It's not next level generosity. This is absolute fraud. This is not generosity. This is people stealing from us at a massive scale, and we need to stop it. These people had the means to get themselves and their dependents to Canada, yet rely on handouts once they're here. Yeah, and Canada enthusiastically encourages them to, and that's bad. We shouldn't do that. This is probably one of the most egregious things that's going on, and this is just the surface. Like, this is what's open, right? Like, DOGE is finding things that are crazy, but like Canada is doing as crazy things for no good reason. Melissa says, insane Gazan family sues Canada because of visa application delays. 11 families from Gaza are taking the Canadian government to court. Totally insane and should not be allowed. This incentivizes all of what was highlighted in this thread here, incentivizes this behavior to sue Canada. I would put those 11 people or whoever, 11 families on a blacklist. They would never be allowed in Canada, period. And I would ignore their baseless legal whatever. I would not respond at all. I would just let them sit and they could never, ever come to Canada. You are blacklisted from the country. You're never coming here. Go away. I'm not talking to you anymore. Bye. Richard is responding to the Globe and Mail. The Globe and Mail says implementing a guaranteed basic income could cut poverty rates by up to 40%. Like for the refugees and migrants, guaranteed basic income like that, give them $150 a month for their big toe. Richard says UBI is a high-speed train ticket to serfdom. My goodness, have we learned nothing from COVID? Canada needs less government, not handouts that will inflate asset values, crush productivity, and change nothing but the price level. Yeah. Yep, that's exactly what needs to be going on here. Soji, this is our grab bag of governance. So Drea Humphreys highlighting wasteful spending and sex indoctrination. And she says the Liberals are handing $1 million to the ARC Foundation, the sex activist group behind Soji 123, to train BC teachers on how to continue indoctrinating kids with their inclusive ideology. Full story. Expose the waste. So it sounds like Rebel News is getting on exposing the waste. Here is the food professor. He says the dairy monopoly that holds Canada hostage. Now, I was a little surprised by the food professor's position on Trump at the beginning. And it's very interesting that he is really clear that most Canadians hate Trump, right? Canadians feel betrayed. I don't think that's true. But here he's talking about supply management, and I wanted to talk about supply management and its impact on interprovincial trade. But he's framing Trump as the bad guy here, and I don't agree with that. So it'll bleed into it a bit, but here we go. Supply management is not just a trade issue. It is central to Canada's long-standing interprovincial trade barriers. While politicians frequently call for a freer domestic market, the reality is that supply management itself is a structural roadblock. I've been talking about that for weeks. Provincial boards, backed by quota allocations and regulatory power, hold significant sway over the dairy industry, reinforcing regional monopolies that make real change virtually impossible. This is why, despite political rhetoric, meaningful progress on interprovincial trade barriers remains elusive. Dismantling these barriers would require a complete overhaul of how supply management operates, something few governments have the appetite to pursue. It was done in the late 90s in New Zealand and Australia. They moved from supply management to open, anybody could have cows, anybody could operate a milk farm, blah, 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 blah. And it took, I think it was 10 years to phase in. The first 5 being quick, and then the last 4 of the last 5 dealing with quota and just normalizing the quota, basically buying out the people who owned a lot of quota. And quota is expensive. One unit of quota can cost you $1 million. So if you have 40 units of quota, it might take a long time for all of that to be paid out properly. But the first 5 years was the transition, and the second 5 years was making sure everybody was made whole financially for their what they had before, the asset of that quota they were paid out for, which makes sense. And you could do it. It's easy. You could do it. It wouldn't be hard. Easy. We could do it. So nobody wants to do it, but sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do, right? It just is. Anyway, most Canadians dislike Trump. Oh, do we? His style, his rhetoric, and his policies. Nope, and nope. But okay. But the reality is that he wields immense economic power. Yep, he sure does. The United States accounts for nearly 25% of global GDP. Meanwhile, Ontario, Canada's most populous province, has productivity levels compared to Alabama, one of the poorest U.S. states. Under these conditions, Canada is in no position to win a trade war with its largest trading partner. Contrary to what many believe, Trump is not economically reckless. His first term saw significant economic growth in the U.S., and it's likely his policies will drive further expansion. He may impose tariffs on selected industries, but he is unlikely to target the agri-food sector. Given its slim profit margins, any tariff-related disruption could severely harm farmers, food processors, and most importantly, consumers within days. However, Trump will undoubtedly use tariffs as a strategic weapon whenever he sees fit. Canada must be braced for this reality. What is truly concerning is that despite typically benefiting from a strong U.S. economy, Canada is currently missing out due to its own productivity challenges. With little economic growth to speak of, Canada is not positioned to capitalize on American prosperity. If we're serious about economic resilience, we must address domestic inefficiencies, starting with supply management and interprovincial trade barriers. Until then, expect more talk, little action, and continued uphill battle against protectionism on both sides of the border. Yep. Unfortunate but true. Nick says one thing Trump and his threats of tariffs have done for Canada is push Buy Canada like I've never seen before. Products are now labeled made in Canada. Not true. It says product of Canada, actually. And Savage says it doesn't say made in Canada. It says product of Canada. Very misleading on purpose, right? It wasn't made here, but it's a product of here. Why? It was canned here. Now, eat your Chinese noodles. Danielle Smith is talking about the controversy at AHS. They've fired the AHS people, I think, fired or investigated. Here it is. Here's about a minute of this.
Logs, Alberta Health Services followed the strategic direction provided by previous governments, signed contracts with charter surgical facilities to help alleviate pressure on our health system and increase capacity. And because it has worked, we tried to expand these centres through new competitive bid processes. In terms of the latest RFP process for new facilities, the former CEO of Alberta Health Services made some very troubling allegations. And those allegations are serious and they are being investigated. We have asked the Auditor General to expedite his review so that we can have answers as soon as possible. I also want to make clear that AHS and AHS only was in charge of conducting procurement for these surgical facility contracts. And although they were awarded through an RFP process, those contracts have not yet been finalized, as I understand it. They will not be finalized until the organizations involved have been cleared of any wrongdoing. In terms of the review by the Auditor General, I have directed all government departments to provide the Auditor General with any information related to this matter. Our government will support the AG's office in any way it can to expedite his investigation, and I'm confident that he'll get to the bottom of the allegations.
And then she goes on to talk about how they're going to continue moving forward with the refocus of AHS and its leadership and so on and so forth. So that's interesting, right? Rail, jeepers creepers. It took us a while to get here. Let's talk about the high-speed rail. Francois-Philippe Champagne says Canada is getting high-speed rail. I don't think it's getting high-speed rail. And it's the largest infrastructure project ever. Toronto-Quebec City corridor is home to 18 million people and 40% of our GDP, and it will be more connected than ever before through sustainable transit. Nope, I don't think so. And here is Mark Nixon. He says, all aboard the Election Express. Liberals just announced a $40 billion high-speed rail project while the government is prorogued and leadership is changing. Translation, pure election bait. Don't worry, your grandkids might see this train someday. No, I don't think so. $40 billion high-speed rail project, top speeds, 300 kilometers an hour. Completion date, to be determined or never. Cost, infinity plus delays. Why now? Oh, right. Election season. Yeah, that's what's going on here. Concerned Canadian says, how did a resigned prime minister sign a $40 billion contract with multiple clauses that won't allow future governments to break contracts? And how is this done outside of a parliamentary process? Is this now a dictatorship? Yeah, right. How much of that $40 billion will end up in the pockets of SNC-Lavalin and other insiders, right? Here is House of Commons staffer. He says, most expensive infrastructure project in Canadian history, and Trudeau had to give one last gift to SNC-Lavalin. Trudeau said the consortium Cadence, made up of CDPQ Infrata, Atkins Realis, Kilos, and these other ones, were selected to build the line. The group was only informed in the last 24 hours that their bid was one of the three submitted, was the best of the three submitted, according to the source that spoke to Radio Canada. So SNC-Lavalin is getting the contract. Isn't that wild? That's pretty crazy stuff, right? Here is Freedom Fighter. He says Trudeau's high-speed rail network is code for liberal money laundering up the wazoo, beginning with a consortium that includes two of Canada's greatest corporate welfare recipients, SNC-Lavalin and Air Canada. A nice little FU to Canada on Trudeau's way out. So yeah, I think so. Corporate head office for Atkins Realis, located in Burnaby, BC. Dave Eby is the premier. Dave Eby. So SNC-Lavalin has landed more than 100 government contracts since Trudeau's ethics controversy, and Atkins Realis is the new name of the Canadian company that was previously known as SNC-Lavalin. The rebrand took place in 2023. So there you go. SNC-Lavalin is central to the new high-speed rail that Trudeau wants to use to buy your votes. Kirk says, this is such an excellent project. Government announced a high-speed rail project that will connect Toronto, Quebec City, and will stop by Montreal and Laval with a couple other stops. I wrote about it and championed this, and this will provide an economic boom to the region and will connect a huge portion of Canada's population. Kirk doesn't understand that this is never going to get built. Sheldon says, now hold up a minute, Kirk. I'm not saying that this is a bad idea or that it won't help provide an economic boon to the region. What I question is the costing of this project. Look at what we're getting in Calgary for $6 billion and then compare it to the new technology rail stations with the budget of less than $4 billion. Again, not disagreeing with the project, just think we should all question the budgeting on this. It's a $40 billion, not $3.9 billion rail. But that's interesting, that $3.9 billion high-speed rail and then $40 billion in the other announcement. Champagne says, it doesn't say a cost. It doesn't say a cost. So I don't know what the cost is. I thought 40 billion, but this one says 3.9 billion. So 3.9 billion is certainly not enough to build that project. Oh, well. Let's talk about Trump and Ukraine. We're almost done. Anti-Taxers says, according to Chrystia Freeland, it's not okay for Donald Trump to use economic coercion as a negotiating strategy, but it was okay for the Canadian government to use economic coercion as a strategy to force Canadians to take a vaccine or be subject to financial ruin. And it was okay to seize and freeze the bank accounts of peaceful protesters that disagreed with the government's policies as a strategy to coerce them into giving up. I'm sick of hearing the double standards spewed by this horrible goblin. Yep, here we go.
The president has repeated these threats. He has said he will use economic coercion to force us to negotiate.
Right.
And I think we as a country need to be extremely clear that capitulation is not a negotiating strategy. The president has
We're not going to listen to him. All he wants you to do is close the borders and stop the drugs. This is not a big ask. It's not terrible, right? It would be helpful. Here's Dave Eby being asked, why are you using war imagery when talking about Donald Trump? He also doesn't like saying Donald Trump's name. He says the president of the United States a lot, but not Trump. Here we go.
Premier, can I just ask you, like, what's the deal with all the war imagery in this speech and in your other speeches you've done? Like Second World War, there's a reference to summoning the strength we used to fight the Nazis once again for the province. Like, can you just talk a bit about why you're choosing that parallel, given how serious the Second World War was? And that's 25% tariffs, but it's not a war per se, but you're using that imagery. Can you talk a bit about using it?
Yeah, I think this is whether it was COVID or whether it's this moment. When we talk about the moments in history, Canadians in British Columbia are all threats to the safety and democracy of Canadians and people around the world. And that is what we need in this moment. We need everybody to come together. We need labor and business to work together. We need Indigenous leadership to be on side. We need all the members of this Legislative Assembly to work to ensure that we're responding to this. Because regardless of whether your house is bombed or whether you're foreclosed from it because you're fired, makes very little difference to a family. And this feels to British Columbians and Canadians, and I think rightly so, feels like an unprovoked attack. And we're facing continual threats to our sovereignty from the President of the United States, from the leader of a country that literally 2 months ago, this would have felt absurd to suggest, had intents towards us that were anything other than neutral or somewhat positive. And so it's a moment when we can only rely on ourselves, pulling together, working together against an outsized and significantly more powerful foe in this moment, in the President of the United States. And it's not Americans, it's not the friends and families across the border we talk to all the time. It's the President. He's decided to do this to us, so we've got to work together.
Premier, can I just ask you, like...
It's interesting. The president's decided to do this to us, and it wouldn't matter if you were foreclosed on or bombed out. Well, yeah, it would be different. I think, like, imagine your house being bombed out by a bomb, and imagine being foreclosed on. Like, one is worse than the other, right? Sure, being foreclosed on is bad, but you own this house, and now it's worthless because a bomb was dropped on it, and you have to rebuild it. Worse, I think, worse. But it's interesting how he's trying to frame Donald Trump doing this to us. We have maneuvered ourselves into this weak position. Like, honestly, here is the Illinois governor talking about Nazis and MAGA and all the rest. Here we go.
I do not invoke the specter of Nazis lightly, but I know the history intimately and have spent more time than probably anyone in this room with people who survived the Holocaust. Here's what I've learned. The root
Do you think he's watched Europa?
that tears apart your house's foundation begins as a seed of distrust and hate and blame. The seed that grew into a dictatorship in Europe a lifetime ago didn't arrive overnight. It started with everyday Germans mad about inflation and looking for someone to blame. I'm watching with a foreboding dread what is happening in our country right now. A president who watches a plane go down in the Potomac and suggests without facts or findings that a diversity hire is responsible for the crash. Or the Missouri Attorney General who just sued Starbucks, arguing that consumers pay higher prices for their coffee because the baristas are too female and non-white. The authoritarian playbook is laid bare here. They point to a group of people who don't look like you and tell you to blame them for your problems. I just have one question. What comes next?
He's severely misrepresenting what happened. And quite honestly, like, all of history misrepresents what happened. So it's interesting how go look at history. And the more you understand about what happened during the period 1930 to 1945, the more you'll understand what's happening right now. Because I think they're going to try and... Hitler got an Olympics in 1936. Trump's getting the Olympics in 2026. And they're more similar than you think. And I'm not saying Trump is like Hitler. I'm saying The powers that be are trying to frame Trump in the same way. Napoleon's the same, trying to frame him in the same way as the bad guy, dictator, his way or the highway, and oh, we're just nice people who want men to be women when we want to, when it suits us, right? And we don't want rule of law. We want you to be crushed under our jackboot, right? Why are they fighting Trump? Why are they saying he's evil? Oh, okay, here's America AF. Holy cow, Trump just said we're going into Fort Knox to make sure the gold is there. He represents an actual threat. They're trying to take him down, right? And other people have represented a threat to their power in history. Napoleon is one, and that other guy is another, and they take them down. And they're trying to do to Trump what they did to those other guys. Here we go.
We're going to go into Fort Knox to make sure the gold is there.
Are they going to?
You know that? We're going to go into Fort Knox. Do you know about that?
Sir,
That was a bad bump.
are they going to eliminate more national security positions, civilians there?
We'll see what happens. But one of the things we do want to look, I mean, we hope everything's fine with Fort Knox, but we're going to go to Fort Knox, the fabled Fort Knox, to make sure the gold is there.
Where would the gold have gone? Brought up.
If the gold isn't there, we're going to be very upset. We're going to go into Fort.
Okay, couple things. I've heard that they're painting silver or tungsten as gold, like they're taking a big tungsten bar and painting it like gold and say, like, look, Mr. President, all the gold's here. So the only way to confirm that it is if you drill inside of it and make sure that it's not tungsten, it's actually gold or silver or whatever it is. The other thing is, if the gold is in Fort Knox, does it belong to Fort Knox, or is it being held in Fort Knox in trust by the Fed? Does the Fed thinks it owns the gold as collateral for the debt? Who owns the gold is the next question. And people are wondering, Clandestine says, this whole Fort Knox situation is peculiar. Trump and Elon would not be bringing this much attention to the situation unless they knew something. They're asking questions they already know the answers to. So yeah, they're up at the upper echelon and they know what's going on and they're trying to expose it and read the people in, right? So they're asking questions that they know the answer to, and they're going to, in hopes that now you're wondering what the answer to the question is. And then when you're wondering what the answer to the question is, you're going to find out. And then it's going to probably fall in line with what Trump wants to do. So, and it's going to inform his next steps, right? If the gold is there, then X, if not, Y. So Elon Musk is responding to Mario. Fox News hosts, what are DOGE opponents hiding? Stuart, Elon Musk is searching up and down the federal bureaucracy. He's looking for fraud and waste. There's a lot of opposition to this. Countless lawsuits have been filed, which begs another question. What are they hiding? And yeah, what are they hiding? They're hiding the biggest fraud ever. And I think it has to do with gold, Fort Knox, gold, the Fed, and it's all going to come out. It's all coming out because it seems like it's all going to come out. Alex Jones says, breaking news, Trump announces DOGE is now officially DOGE dividend checks are now officially under consideration. Under the proposal, the American people would receive 20% of the overall the money saved from DOGE in a tax break. Cutting wasteful fraud spending, and another 20% would be paid towards the looming national debt crisis. And they break it down. And so that's 40%. And somebody says, what happens to the other 60%? What are they going to do with the other 60%, right? Very interesting question. Here is CBS's Gayle King. They're trying to blame Trump for the plane crashes, but this guy says this is not what's going on.
Secretary of Transportation, I understand that the cuts at this time are something that are raising questions, but the reality is there's over 50,000 people that work at the FAA, and the cuts, I understand, were 300 people, and they were in non-critical safety functions. The Trump administration has committed to investing deeply in terms of improving the overall technologies that are used in the air traffic control systems and modernizing the skies. They've committed to hiring additional controllers and investigators and safety investigators. So no, I'm not concerned with that at all.
So there you go. It's not Trump's fault that planes are falling out of the sky. There's other things going on here. This is another one. This is about Zelensky, though. Trump wants to audit the hundreds of $billions sent to Ukraine. He says that it's time for elections. Trump knows that Zelensky is a deep state puppet. The CIA and deep state, or the CIA and State Department, strings are being cut, and deep state control of Ukraine is coming to a close. Yes, I think it's a rogue state, and I think it has been for a while. Here is Maxime Bernier. He says the Americans and Russians are finally talking to each other to end the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, our pro-war idiots in Ottawa, liberals and conservatives, continue to demonize Putin and Trump and to align with the pathetic European governments that think they can continue this deadly and completely useless war that has bankrupt them, even though they don't have the military means to do so. And are there still adults in Ottawa who understand Geopolitics 101? Maybe, but it's few and far between, I think. Here is the Polish army. So there's no real army in EU. It doesn't have its own army. So according to Matt, the Polish army may be about to become NATO's army, or whatever we might need to replace NATO in the next 6 weeks, Eastern Anchor. And in Canada, we're still wondering by what year we should hit 2%. We should be spending 5% today. So according to this one, an Eastern European official has told the German newspaper Bild that discussions are ongoing in regards to the withdrawal of U.S. troops from all countries in Europe that joined the NATO alliance after 1990, which is reported to have been one of the goals of the recent negotiations between Russia and the United States. This would include Albania, Bulgaria, Croatia, Chechnya, I'm getting that wrong. Estonia, Finland, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Sweden. Additionally, preparations are said to be ongoing in Italy for the possible withdrawal of U.S. forces from Kosovo. So NATO countries who have joined NATO should be able to protect themselves and use their funding to protect themselves and do NATO operations in their countries without the United States being there, right? And so that's part of the negotiations between Trump and Putin, and that's interesting, right? Gunther says Trump on Ukraine being unhappy about not being at the table for negotiations. He says they've had years. Here we go.
Do you have any message for Ukrainians who, after 3 years of fighting, might feel betrayed or disappointed at not having a seat at these initial talks in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think I'm really disappointed in what's happened. I've been watching this for 3 years. It's a war that would have never happened if I was president, and I've been watching these people being killed at levels that you've rarely seen, not even close, since the Second World War. And I'm very disappointed. I hear that they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years, and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago without the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives, and without the loss of cities that are just laying on their sides. You have those magnificent golden domes that are shattered, will never be replaced. You can't replace them. 1,000-year-old domes that are so beautiful, you can't replace that. The whole civilization has changed because of what. So when they're worried about not being seated, you mean somebody that should have gone in and made a deal a long time ago?
They had time. They didn't do anything. Trump's here now, and he's going to finish it. Clint says Trump is 100% done with Zelensky. Martial law, refusal to seek peace, lack of elections, and his 4% approval rating are given as reasons why it'll only be the U.S. and Russia at the negotiating table. This war is ending. So fingers crossed. The Perimeter says Donald Trump called it right on Ukraine. Turns out that he saw the war pigs in D.C. He saw what the war pigs in D.C. didn't want to see. Zelensky's crew torched the Minsk agreements. Not once, not twice, but 3 damn times. They took a sledgehammer to the deal, egged on by Victoria Nuland, neocon poster child, and her NATO cheer squad. So it goes through that. But yeah, it seems like the end is near. And CTV News says Trudeau says democracy at stake as Ukraine kept away from the peace talks. So wrong side of history as usual, Justin Trudeau. And the invasion that Trump is ending, we continue to fund. Nick says breaking, President Trump will be signing an executive order tonight terminating any and all federal taxpayer benefits going to illegals. This would have been better with the House of Commons guy tweet after going through all the stuff the illegals get. Darn, missed opportunity. But imagine we had somebody in charge who got rid of all that at the stroke of a pen. Right? Holy smoke-a-ronies. We'd be stronger immediately after that as a country. Immediately after that. Because no more money would be being wasted on foreigners. Anyway, executive order tonight, terminating any and all taxpayer funding going to illegals. This will also mandate the stiffening of eligibility verification to prevent federal benefits going to illegals, of which a lot of fraud has been found in the past weeks. Public health benefits will now be shifted to prioritize American citizens, including veterans, per Fox. So fundamentally, like when you've got Dave Eby talking about, World War II against Trump, when you've got Justin Trudeau talking about Trump being a bad guy and all these people who are saying that Trump's a Nazi and so on and so forth, or similar to Nazis, the hate and all this stuff. They don't want them to find the fraud that they have figured out how to embed in our governments and bilk billions of dollars from us yearly, every year, right? And Trump is stopping it. And so that's why they hate him. That's the only reason they hate him, I think. Like, I don't think that they hate him because he's better at governing than they are. I think they hate him because he's dismantling their fraud rings. And I think that that's really freaking obvious. Like, it seems really obvious, but the people who hate him and who are screaming about all of this want to protect the fraud that's going through US aid and all sorts of other places. And not just for them personally necessarily, but like institutions that they front, like Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party, right? Like, he's worried about the US aid funding making the Liberal parties non-competitive in the next election because no more American money is coming to pad their candidates, right? Who knows? Maybe that's a motivation for Justin Trudeau. And I think that Trump doing what he's doing is systemically removing their ability to operate. And the more he does that, the more they're going to scream. And the more they scream, the more they out themselves as people who are benefiting from this dark money. And given a certain amount of time, and Trump's got 4 years, right? We're a couple of weeks in, right? We're a month today, and he's done a lot. So given enough time, I think he'll smoke out the people who are committing fraud and he'll get rid of them. I just wish we had people in Canada who could see what Trump is doing is beneficial for the American people, and that's his job. And Canadian leaders are sitting here trying to frame Trump as the bad guy instead of looking at what he's doing and extrapolating to Canada and saying, maybe that's happening here. Maybe we should investigate that. You don't even need to look far. It's public. All the waste is public. It's public. And we're doing this for what? Our health? It doesn't help us. It's bad for us. Anyway, this show's long, so you're welcome. And I'm sorry. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for your support. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Oh, my mouse is in the wrong spot.